Hello, how are you today? We're so glad to see you. Today we want to begin by remembering those in the path of Hurricane Michael. It wasn't that long ago when we were remembering those in the path of Hurricane Florence. Our nation is experiencing weather issues, and we want to remember everyone. Almost everything that we need to know about beginning, advancing, and fulfilling an interesting story can be found in the representation of a train ride. I like this. This is a cool idea. My guest today will explain that, telling us about pacing, tension, character development, and plot refinement. It's going to be great. I'm so glad that you're here. Hi, I'm Patricia Durkin, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission. We present marketing interviews and tutorials by and for Christian writers, speakers, and artists. This is episode number 148, Fiction is Like a Train Ride, with writer John L. Moore. Hello, John. How are you?
Hey, Patricia. Good to be here.
We really appreciate you taking the time. Before we even get started, here are three of John's books. This is the Ezra Riley Series. These are not the only books that John has written. I'm reading this one right now. It's the very first one, and I wanted to absorb them all in one weekend. Then I changed my mind. These are books that you want to savor, and I'm doing that. Thank you for that, John.
You're welcome.
All right, where are we heading today? What are you going to tell us about?
Let's get on the train, shall we?
Okay.
All stories, all storytelling is a trip. It's a journey. You're taking the reader, you're inviting the reader, shall we say, on a journey. And you need a mode of transportation. And of course, that is your story, the novel itself. But to use a symbol, I choose the train over anything else because, first of all, who likes planes anymore? I mean, that hardly seems like an enjoyable journey. Cars are too confining. They limit, the number of characters. Ocean liner would work, except the view doesn't change much, But the train, I think, is really analogous to the process. For one thing, you have a dining car. You have sleeping cars. You have the observation deck on some. And you just have your regular first class and then coach type passenger cars as well. But you also have that rhythm of the track, which has its own cadence and meter, for the story. You have just the all ambiance, of the station, the depot, people. Trains, Johnny Cash isn't the only one who loves trains, all right? My last train ride was 20 years ago, but I think trains are special, and they do represent storytelling. But a couple of caveats there. Number one, if you were, let's say you're walking down the street and you see a large poster on a window inviting you to take a tour, and you say, this looks interesting. I might learn something. I might meet interesting people. And it's not real costly. It is going to require some time. I think I'll do it. So you go down and you're put on a train. Well, let's say you ride for about 2 hours and all of a sudden you're there and all you've seen is the same flat, level landscape. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with flat country. All country has its beauty. But if you were to just go through hours and hours and hours of flat wheat fields or flat desert ground, whatever, it'd be like the ocean waves after a while. It would get monotonous. And this is my number one thing, just to really implore to writers is avoid flat writing. And it's pretty easy for me to pick up a book, and I think for most readers, to pick up a book and tell within about 2 paragraphs if it's going to be flat writing or not. And some of these books are pretty popular. One that was given or recommended to me by a woman in ministry who I admire a lot, and she really, really bragged about this book. And neither my wife nor I have been able to finish it. And Deborah's much more diligent than I am. I toss more books over my shoulder than the garbage man can catch. All right. But This one, has won a few or placed in some awards and everything. But to me, while it wasn't horrendously flat, everything was fairly two-dimensional right away. And there were blurbs and endorsements saying how developed the characters were. And I never got that sense. I never felt that way. So I think most readers, if you set your standards a little higher, all right, we've been dumbed down. Ellen Bloom, 20 years ago, wrote a wonderful book called The Closing of the American Mind, I believe it was called. I'd have to go dig through my books to find it. But what he really taught then was the dumbing down of America. And this is true in the secular world, and it's true in the Christian world. We keep lowering the bar, and we don't expect much from the reader. We con the reader a lot by saying, oh, it's a bestseller, it's this, it's that, and again, it's just writers slapping each other on the back or paying debts to each other kind of thing. And it's very disingenuous, and it does not raise the expectations of our writing. So if you got on that train and you just went across flat level country and you never really met anybody that interesting, you'd be disappointed with that flat ride, and you'd want to take that tour again. So to avoid flat riding, well, first of all, what's the main thing that causes flat riding? There's several. Just a lack of knowledge is one, just being ignorant of how to do it differently. But I think the number one reason is people fall in love with their story, and they're in a rush to get to the end. So you have linear writing. You have point A, I'm getting on the train, and then, oh man, I can see the end. Let's get to point B. Let's rush right over there, and then I can sit back and everybody can tell me how wonderful my book is. All right? And you'll hear me repeat this a lot, but you have to repeat things basically 3 times, or say things 3 times, repeat them twice, for people to even get a handle on it. So avoid linear writing. Avoid falling in love with your storyline in such a way that you're in a rush to get to the end, because you can see it. All right. And boy, you get tunnel vision. All right. And the problem with that, if you can see the end, so can the reader. And there is nothing more disappointing to a reader than seeing the end by chapter 2. All right. There's 40 chapters in the book. And by chapter 2, you think, well, I know how this is going to come out.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, don't go to the other extreme. Okay. Several hours on just a flat train ride with 2-dimensional characters. Imagine people coming in and sitting down and they look like they're made out of cardboard. All right. They move stiffly. All right. They talk stiffly. They have a monotone. Nothing they say is that interesting. They're stereotypical, but they're really 2-dimensional. You don't see any roundness to them. You don't feel heartbeat and breath, coming out of them. So you're on a flat ride with 2-dimensional characters, and you're not learning anything either. The tour guide isn't pointing out historical points of interest because there aren't any. So you're just going from point A to point B. Well, don't go to the other extreme. If I'm looking at the back cover of a book and it talks about a thrill-a-minute roller coaster ride, over the shoulder, it's not one I'm going to be interested in reading, because that tells me the person is just after cheap thrills. And here's the problem. Roller coasters are fun for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't want to be on one for 6 or 8 hours. And so people that say, oh, it's just a roller coaster ride of thrills and blah, blah, blah. Well, they're using a gimmick, and we can't be gimmicky about our writing. And a lot of young writers, on my notes, there's a progression, and it says trade, craft, skill, art. Now that's a progression. Okay. Now you may begin the writing trade, and that word comes from an old word meaning beaten path. So there's many people on that. All right. And if you remember from weeks ago, money is not time, time is money. So consequently, we exchange, our time for what somebody else has produced, and that's what a trade is. Trade is simply trading for, what you need. So you may enter writing as a trade, honorable trade it used to be. I mean, it's always had its skunks, all right? Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with that as a trade. And then as you refine it and polish it and grow in it, it becomes a craft. There's nothing wrong with crafts, but there inherently is not where we want to end, because craft itself is not necessarily a good term, because we have witchcraft and pagans and warlocks and witches actually refer to it as the craft. All right. Mm-hmm. So there's espionage thrillers will use the term spy craft. Mm-hmm. All right. Because why? In either of those cases, you have to be crafty. All right. Now, being crafty isn't necessarily such a great thing. Okay, it's something you'd probably give a antagonist, not your protagonist, and certainly not your narrator. You don't want a crafty narrator, because again, they're going to be sly. That cleverness is going to be deceitful. Okay, so what you want to get beyond craft, and the next step up is skill. All right, to become skilled, which actually reminds me of one of my favorite Bible verses. See this beautifully bound Bible? See that?
Yes.
Buffalo hide.
Oh.
A cowboy friend of mine in Texas, Rick Kenner. And if you need a Bible rebound, he's definitely the man. All right. Okay, but a scripture that most people are familiar with, Psalm 45:1. My heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the King. My tongue is the pen of a ready or skillful writer. All right. So there, the emphasis is put on skill. And skill is important. Skill is where we take our talents, and through diligence and discipline and humility and just perseverance and insight and some help from the Lord, we get skillful with it. Well, the next step is art, and I'm not saying that I can define that. All right, I'm happy. I'm not happy to be just on a skill level, and some would put me on the art level, but that's for others to do at this point, not for me. But art is where my heart is, because I think that the Creator has endowed us with a creative desire, and that creative desire is artistic within all of us, to varying levels and to the varying areas of healing that we want to go through, because life and the world, and the devil, are trying to crush that in all of us. And that's what a lot of my books are about. My novels is about the attempt of the world to destroy the artistic, to destroy the creative. So I don't know that I know exactly what art is, but to paraphrase a Supreme Court justice from years ago, I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
I know it when I read it. Okay. So to the young writer, whether 20, 15, or 70, but to the young writer, I would like to lay out this standard to go beyond trade, beyond craft, develop your skill, but have your eye towards art. All right, towards art. Now, how do you handle a story artistically? It's not with lots of decorations. Okay, that's what most people confuse. I used in my notes what you said was one of your favorite words, obfuscate. All right. Oh, look at her. She just warms to that word, obfuscate. Okay, because you like clarity.
Yes.
See, and good writing is good thinking. If you don't have good thinking, you won't have good writing. So you have to train your mind to think clearly. All right. And that process at some point is you have to realize you don't think clearly. All right. You have to come to that realization. My thoughts are pretty muddled. They're not very clear. They're not very well fed. They're not very brilliant. There's not a lot of light coming in. Okay. If you're looking out the train window, you want to see things in stark contrasts of beauty. Now, you may go through a tunnel, which is fine. All right. Every good train story needs a tunnel because we need that sense of coming into something new. It can represent rebirth. And you have to have a lot more symbolism and representations in your work in a very subtle way. Not wham, up in your face kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But the great writers use these things symbolically. The problem with most Christian writers is they're too preachy. They're just too preachy. And rather than show, they want to tell. Mm-hmm. And everybody gets tired of being preached at.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody. And especially if you haven't asked for it.
Yes.
All right.
You don't want to be. It's very, very difficult. We hear it. We don't know how to do it. We don't know what it looks like. You're so rarely do we see it.
Well, one thing Christian writers need to do is quit reading so much Christian writing. First and foremost. I mean, that's the problem. We got an echo chamber. We simply have an echo chamber, and if somebody gets a little bit of success, everybody starts echoing what they're doing. You need to read classics. You need to read people that write not necessarily evangelically Christian books, but books with a Christian worldview, like Flannery O'Connor, for example, Eugenia Price. I mean, there's a number of them out there. You need to read some of those and see how they have woven Christian themes into their story without saying, look, stop here. I mean, imagine you're on your train again and you're going along and all of a sudden it hits the brakes. Trains don't stop easily.
Yeah.
Okay. But as writers, people do that. The train is beginning to pick up speed. It's beginning to go somewhere. And all of a sudden, wham, brake, and here's an important point. Well, you never do that in fiction. If you want to be didactic and dogmatic and doctrinal, then go back to nonfiction or write nonfiction. But you don't do that in storytelling. Mm-hmm. Number one is respect your reader. And if you're just kind of ego crazed, that it's all about you and you telling the story and everybody's going to love you and accept you, and it's just the an anti-Christian spirit. Which is, the Christian spirit is death to self, the elevation of Christ. This is, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. As we're going down the train. Imagine having a tour guide standing in the aisle. You're going down the train and he's just standing there saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. I'm a tour guide. All right? And you get that voice out of some writing, is that the writer can be so impressed with themselves that they're not giving themselves. Again, the gift makes room for you and brings you before great men. So the gift has to be bigger than you. So you give yourself to that gift. You don't make the gift elevate you. So you have to just die to that process of taking the spotlight. As a writer, you don't hold the light. I get this one. And hold it, right on my face. That's enough. Didn't mean to shock everybody. You want it down here on your story. The spotlight falls on the story. Okay, so now you're back in that train. And guess what? When you think of trains, you think of noise because of the tracks, that meter that I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. You think of the visual because of windows and people moving up and down the aisle. You think of noise as far as the people go and people coming by. But there'd be a sense of smell, all right, of whether it's from the dining car or if it's an older novel, it's either steam, whatever it is, but there's going to be, a flat novel doesn't have all five senses in it. And that's why I think a few years back and even up to now, there was a literary fad for literary novels that incorporated like a cookbook, with recipes and things. Uh-huh. And I think that was because taste and the sense of taste and the imagining of taste came into the book. And with some Southern writing, Southerners, I think, hate, and you can't hit me with rocks through a screen. I think Southerners like to eat. I'm just guessing. All right. All right. Because I think there's a stronger taste element. You know, when you read some Southern writing, you get a little more sense of things said at meals and the description of the food. But all of that, all of your five senses plus your sixth sense, your intuition is important. And the intuition has to come across. But Christians will overdo that, all right, too often. And they make everything a little too miraculous, a little too divine, okay? But so let's get away from that for a moment and get back to all these other senses. Well, if you just have a flat story and cardboard characters, you're just playing this two-dimensional movie in your head, and you're transcribing it onto the page.
Yes.
All right? That is not writing. Okay? That is transcription, mental transcription. All right? And nobody wants to just step into your head and watch your movie. Okay? They really don't. They don't want to step into my head, believe me. They don't. So quit imagining that they do. So it has to project out of you. It can't project where you're trying to bring people into you. Mm-hmm. It has to project out of you and has to be well-rounded. So it can't just be, oh, I write like I see this movie playing in my mind. No. No, please don't. No, because you need more than that, because that's going to be two-dimensional and it's going to be flat. So you need touch, and you don't see enough touch, you know, the sense of touch in stories. Even little things. I mean, the good writers do it and know it, but weather, the sense of weather, what climate and just the daily weather does to your life. You know, it's a dark and stormy night. I mean, they end it with that, you know, they open with that and then they never get back to the storm. All right. Mm-hmm. But I am not reading hardly any American fiction right now. I'm about to quit fiction, I think, because I've got a really cool book sent to me. Being a journalist, I get offers all the time to receive review books. And I just finally accepted one. And it's by a man named Michael Gillen, who's a science journalist. And it's all about how technology is going to completely change our future and change our lives, you know, somewhat for the good, somewhat for the bad. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to read it as research as much as anything. But if I'm writing fiction, I read just fiction for the most part. And if I'm writing a third-person novel, which 5 of mine have been third-person, then I'm only going to read third-person.
Interesting.
Okay? Yeah, I don't read first-person novels at all. I made one exception in the past 6 months, and that was for a writer that I think is so brilliant that I thought I'm going to read him no matter what. And his was in first person, you know, so I read it. But for the most part, I don't. But I'm not reading hardly any American fiction because, well, I was going to recommend these books at the end, but this one is one of the books I really is marked up. If you go through here, you know, you'll just find lots of markings, and that's what should really show you, you know, that a book has meant something to you. Yes. This is John Gardner on moral fiction. Mm-hmm. Now, throw out your little Christianese idea of what this book is about, because it's not about good and bad and, you know, in that sense of morality and morals that, you know, we as Christians might ascribe to something. This is about honesty in art, what art is, the integrity of the artist, the integrity of art. This was written 41 years ago. Mr. Gardner's been deceased for a while. And I was just thumbing through it last night and thought, man, most universities, and he was highly acclaimed literary writer, you know, during his lifetime, would not even teach him today, because some of the things he's saying, our society and our culture has just devolved to a point where what a very secular writer was writing 41 years ago, we would not even probably read in a college classroom today. He wrote another book, which is one of my top 10, on becoming a novelist, John Gardner. And to be honest, I've never read one of his novels, but I collect books on writing. Mm-hmm. As I put in my notes last night, I did a quick count last night before I went to bed. Mm-hmm. And I have actually found, I forgot the one that I'm included in. So my tally, and I've probably missed half a dozen, I have 104 books just on the craft of writing. Mm-hmm. And I've probably read 95 of them. All right. And some of them, like this one, I've read more than once. Mm-hmm. And there's a few more I haven't read yet. And there's probably somewhere between 6 and 20 that I threw away because they were not worth keeping. Mm-hmm. Either they had a new age kind of spirit in them that I didn't want, or in some Christian sense, I thought this is just too shallow. You know, because Christian writers tend to just focus on getting published. And that is on my list, that's probably about the third most important thing as a writer, is to get published. And too many writing seminars and too many things are all built around, you got to get published. We'll get you published. We'll get you, you know. And that's well and good, and all young writers are going to think that way. I don't care if you start at 12 or if you start at 72. Mm-hmm. Your goal is to be published, but it doesn't mean that's your priority. Okay? Just because it's a goal doesn't mean it's number one on the list of goals. Mm. Now, number one should be to glorify God, but we have to put that in quotes because Christians tend to make that religious. Mm-hmm. Oh, I did this to glorify God, you know. Nice me, you know, I dedicated this book to Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I've actually, you know, we probably have all seen that. Yeah. And I can't judge the people that did that. Man, I'd never do it. I'd never dedicate, you know, I mean, if it comes out of a right spirit and right heart, it's fine. But I think you're just going out on a plank when you do that, because, you know, it's like I always get this mental picture of you know, giving the book to the Lord, and he looks at it and says, well, thank you. I wish you would have written better. If you're going to dedicate it to me, you know, I value some skill. I've already said that here in Psalm 45, that I value skill, you know, and he would accept it. You know, certainly he's much more gracious than I am. He would accept it in the spirit that it's given. But I lean more towards my friend Wally Badgett, the cowboy cartoonist, who does mostly calendars these days, but he's done about 11 or 12 cartoon books. And one of them, he says, I dedicate this book to me because I did all the work. Now that's honesty.
Tells you everything you need to know about Wally, doesn't it?
Well, it's a start.
Let me check and see if we have any comments. Kathy Green is here. She says, this is such an important topic. She's glad she tuned in, and so are we, Kathy. Very insightful. Quit reading Christian books, Katie says. She's repeating some of the stuff that you had mentioned and suggested. And Kathy Jones, hello. Thanks very much for being here, everyone. We appreciate it. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask them, and we will do our best to answer them. We being John.
I'll let you answer a few for me. Okay, now you're back on the train. You know, we're avoiding flat country. We're avoiding cartoon characters. You want to introduce really interesting people. All right, not just people. Again, obfuscation. My phone's ringing over here. I shut it off, but it's still trying to ring. But it'll quit in a minute. Anyway, you never introduce a character just to introduce a character. As John Gardner has a word here on becoming a novelist, and I couldn't find it in the dictionary, but he says profluence, the sense that things are moving, getting somewhere, flowing forward. Uh-huh. You have to have that sense of profluence. And everything then that's introduced into a novel has to move the story forward. Doesn't have to jolt it forward. Again, you're on a train. You don't want whiplash. All right, you got to stay on the rails. Maybe that's why I chose a train. Okay? Uh-huh. You have to stay on the rails. So you have certain rules that you have to follow. As a young writer and being a young rebellious, you know, hippie type person back then, I wanted to break every rule that, you know, came my way. And I broke a lot of writing rules for a long time. And I went through that famous writer's course, or, something like that. When I subscribed to it when I was like 18 years old. And first time I did, I met with the representative, who was a seedy old character in a seedy motel room. And he just looked at me and says, "Oh, you're too young. Get out of here."
Oh.
I mean, he literally could have taken my $400, but he just told me the truth. I'd already been a newspaper reporter for a year. So I thought, hey, who are you telling? Hey, blah, blah, blah. But I did, a few years later, join again and start the courses, and got criticized for obfuscating. Okay. And learned it took me a while. Again, you have to hear things, 3 times, maybe, before you start really knowing things. But never do anything that doesn't move the story forward. And don't introduce a character just thinking that this will add mystery, this will do something to make the novel more complex. It'll just be confusing, and the reader will feel cheated. Don't ever cheat your reader. I can't stress that enough. Selfish writers only think about themselves. Professionals think about the reader and have a respect for the reader. Okay? And I don't want to cheat the reader. If they spent money on my book, I don't want them to feel that I should send them the money back. And I have sold books to people with that promise. If you don't like this book, you send it back to me and I'll refund your money. Because I'm not a tradesman. All right? I'm not a tradesman. I am a craftsman with some skill that's working my way towards artistry. All right? I'm not just a tradesman. And tradesman's probably a pretty pleasant term, for what level, some of these people can operate on that call themselves writers. And that's another thing. And you've heard me say that I don't like the term author. I have to use it occasionally, and it's subscribed to me, more than I use it. But I don't use that term because there's a sense then that you've arrived. And it means nothing to me, the term author. I'm a writer. And I am continuing to be one, and I'm trying to improve all the time. There's no sense that I have arrived, no sense that I'm elbowing my way into the table with the masters and saying, make room for me. All right? You get invited into those situations. You can't elbow your way in. I hate the term author in today's term because, as I said in the first session, its root is in the word authority. So if you're going to be an author, you should, by golly, know something. All right?
Yes.
Don't just pay to have a book printed and with your name on it so you can hold it up and admire yourself. There's very few out of all my books, all 10 of them, and I'm not counting my book of poetry, which I haven't even mentioned. If I throw it out, there's only one that has a photo of me. And the one thing you'll find through self-publishing and subsidy publishing is everybody wants their picture on the back. All right. And again, certainly we all go through that phase, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I can generally look at a person's photo because that's the travel poster. Your front cover, your back cover is a travel poster telling you if you want to get on this train. And you look at the conductor, and he looks like he's so totally full of himself, so pleased with himself, or just so, whatever, I mean, it's just, you should be able to present yourself in a photograph where you think, okay, I want to go on a trip with this person.
Yes.
All right. But see, so that's your book cover, front and back, is that travel tour poster. It's the advertisement to go on that trip. Now, I like to have unusual or different names for my characters. I was criticized in a review just recently by a Montana paper, and I could tell that this journalist, I think it's a little grandiose of me to say, but you could sense a little jealousy in his review, like, how come I didn't know about this guy, and he's from Montana, blah, blah, blah. And he criticized me for using unusual names.
Mm.
in my, especially in Leaving the Land. There's a Demetrius Pratt, and there's a Cletus Pratt. Well, these two boys are out of Louisiana, all right? And they're probably not just going to have your typical names. I mean,
Yeah.
it's odd. You have to have memorable names,
Yeah.
but a best-selling novelist, in his latest book, he has two characters in there with similar names. And how in the world his editor let him get by with that? Well, he's a best-selling author. That's why. But I mean, if he wasn't, the editor would say, oh, no, you can't have two names that sound so much alike. Well, you shouldn't have. Why in the world he did that, is just floors me. And he's written 20 novels, and probably, maybe all of them have been on the New York Times bestsellers list. All right. But you want to have names that are distinctive. And that's another place where young writers in the Christian market especially just falls flat. Everybody's got just this sort of Barbie and Ken, persona and name. Everybody's an Eric, or there's a Tiffany, or there's a, and you got to get people that are memorable. Number one thing about novels is the characters. It's number one. Make your storyline way back there. All right. You need a good plot, and I'll get to that in a minute. But where I digressed from is your priorities. Your first one is to glorify God, but what does that really mean? All right. Because we're first of all, we're dealing in fiction. So we're dealing in an artistic form, and we're going to glorify God through excellence, but we're going to glorify God through our character. All right. We're not so much the product here, but really it's going to get down to the people that know us, and they think, well, he's written a really good book, but guess what? He pays his bills. His yard is clean. All right. Things like that. I mean, we get hoity-toity because we're always trying to horse trade with the Lord. Everybody's, if you got an ego here that you need to fulfill, and I say everybody, and I know as I'm speaking generally, there's, a few exceptions out there, but I'm talking about artists, and I'm talking about musicians, and I'm talking about, novelists and writers. And if you ever have my good friend Ray Hughes on, he'll talk about musicians, and it drives him nuts because he deals with the highest level in the world. And he has so many great young musicians coming to him, and too often their whole thing is, how do I get recorded? Just like writers come to me and they say, how do I get published? Everything's about getting published. No, it's not. All right. First of all, you just want to please the Lord in the product that you do. You're not going to change the world necessarily, but you might change a few lives. All right. So that's number one, is you are presenting your gift to the King. I mean, that scripture, if I remember, my heart is stirred by a noble theme. So you need that noble theme. It has to be noble. It can't be pedantic. It can't be pedestrian. All right. It has to have a noble thing. You recite your verses for the King. All right. You're writing for the King. And my tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. So you learn that type of skill. So first of all, Colossians 3:23, all things are unto him. Okay, it's that sense. Everything I do, you're doing onto him, but don't make a big deal out of it, because you can't horse trade with God because he owns all the horses. All right. Now I grew up. My dad was a horse trader. His dad was a horse trader. I've been a horse trader. I know about trading horses. You don't horse trade with God. Just because you mention his name on the front and the back and everything else, he isn't going to say, well, thank you. I think I'll push you to the top of New York Times bestsellers list. All right. Yes. I mean, so we don't know what it means. All right. So do it in your heart. What in your heart you think pleases the King. It has to be a heart thing. Number two is you have to respect yourself. Don't ever sell out, even if it means trading fame and glory and all this, And I've had those opportunities. And you can't sell your reputation. You can't sell your sense of yourself. And part of that, though, is you have to become the best that you can be. Don't lower the bar for yourself to where you are content, where you are content with the level that you've achieved in your artistry. And number three in that, in getting published, is fine. You want to be published because you want an audience. That's fine. Okay. And preferably, and Ray Hughes and I joke about this, we'd sort of, like to see this in the land of the living. Again, quoting the Old Testament, we'd like to enjoy some of those blessings in the land of the living. I'd like my audience on this side. But if I don't get it, it doesn't change priority 1 and 2. Okay. So you do want to be published, but, and I'll take a breath after this, but this is important. Your getting published does not make you a good writer. All right.
Yeah.
Being a good writer might get you published.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't get the cart before the horse. There's a lot of people that get published and they're not very good writers. But if you think that getting published is the high watermark, and now you're a good writer because you're published, you'll never, that's your plateau. You're going to plateau there. You're not going to keep going. Okay. So getting published doesn't mean you're a good writer. But if your goal is to be a good writer, you will get published.
I appreciate that clarity that you just shared with us. I wasn't unsure initially what was the problem with getting published, but now, because it is a goal and it's a worthy goal and it's not supposed to be number 1. But then when you say that the real danger to the writer is they'll become complacent and they won't keep stretching and glorify God even more, serve their audience even on a deeper level. That makes sense to me. I understand that. That's very clear.
Well, I don't think I told this story, but before I wrote my first novel, first book, I'd started books. I'd done my poetry book. I'd done a book on the bucking horse sale here, a little chap book, about 90 pages, very popular, but very regional book in many ways. I've done PR, I've done some advertising, and I was working for a breed association, and I got a letter in the mail, just like I get emails all day long now. And I opened it up, and it was from some university in the Midwest. And I think this man's specialty was dairy, if I remember right. He was a geneticist. He was a PhD. And his opening sentence, and there was this stiff, hollow picture of an older man on his stationery. And he says, "As you can see by my credits, I am an author." And just the pomposity of his opening sentence, like it was a hot day in the summer. I was walking from the bunkhouse to the house, and I'm reading this as I go over to where was my office then. And I almost just tipped over dead, just by the whole pomposity of this guy. "As you can see by my stationery, which I designed and had printed, I am an author." And I thought, you know what? If I don't get my butt off the ground and start really working, in 40 years, that's going to be me. See, I wasn't so down on him. I was down on what it was speaking to me.
Yes.
Because he thought that being published meant he had made it, that he was somebody. He was something special. All right. Now, he was an authority, evidently, probably in dairy cattle genetics and physiology and, etc., which is fine, all right, because authority, again, the root word is author, so that's fine. But to say and to grasp that identity, to me, was pompous, and you need to get past that to where all I tell people is I'm a writer. And they'll say then, well, what do you write? And I'll just start naming it because I've written everything except a stage play and a screenplay. I started the latter and never finished it. So I'm just a writer, and I'm going to improve. That's who I am in my DNA, all right, is a writer. Now, how does that come out? It comes out in nonfiction. It comes out in editorials. It comes out in features. It comes out in short stories. It comes out in poetry. It comes out in novels. Now, which one touches the readers the most is the one that I need to spend my time in. All right. I need to understand that if that's where my readership is, that's probably where I need to spend some time, maybe not in my case, all the time. All right. But you have to probably go to where you have an audience and not try and create one. A book I know there's probably more women watching than men. And if I'm going to recommend a book on writing, I like this book. I'm not crazy about it, but it's certainly worth owning. You know, like I say, I have 104. But I think women especially will like The Writing Life by Annie Dillard. And she's a very, very accomplished writer. And she's accomplished in the secular realm, which is a much tougher arena. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
You know, Christian writers are playing on the B squad most of the time, and we just think that we're all state, you know, and we're all American and all this. And you know, you have, out of all those books on writing, you know, the 104, I would say that 80 of them are written by secular authors. Mm-hmm. Maybe 20 or so are written by Christian authors. And most of those are on literature themes, journalism messages and themes, a broad overview of writing and culture in America, not on the craft of writing. Mm. I only have one or two written by Christians on the craft of writing. Yeah, I'm a terrible snob, all right? I mean, I admit it. But the thing is, I don't learn a lot from some of those that I've read on, you know, there are two or three, you know, that I thought were really good. But most of them are all about success. And their success is getting published in the local paper, you know, and they've got a little column that appears once a month or something along these lines. That's all well and good. I don't mean to hurt anybody's, you know, feelings. But is that kingdom? Is that culture changing? Now, yeah, if we have 1 million of them and they're all really good, you know, we're going to impact culture a little. But I might be only talking to one person out there. And it might be that one person who wants to know if they should be serious about writing. All right? Serious to where it really tears your heart out. You pay a deep, deep price. It's not about you and having your photo on the back of a book so you can frame it and put it all over the walls and your friends will be impressed, but where you die in this process because it's that painful. You know, it can be that gut-wrenching. It takes me 2 to 5 years to write a novel. All right. Wow. Now, I could do one in about 2 months, but I'd be ashamed of it. Yeah. It might make me a lot of money, but that doesn't. I'm not for sale. Sorry, I'm not going to sell out even to me. Okay. So Annie Dillard. Yeah, I just opened up to something I underlined here, and I think this is just wonderful. She says, "I cannot imagine a sorrier pursuit than struggling for years to write a book that attempts to appeal to people who do not read in the first place."
Oh. Wise word.
Isn't that great? You know how many writers are doing that? I can be guilty of it because I've got all these illiterate friends, I jokingly call them, you know, and they all want me to write a little dumber, you know, dumb it down, a little more action, you know, a little more of this. And why? Are they going to read it in the first place? No, because there's not enough pictures in it. Right? I mean, I know I'm a snob, I'm sorry. But if you're working towards that artistic realm and really kingdom-changing type of realm, you know, you can't stop along the way. You know, if you're on that train and you're in the lowlands and you can say, okay, now from here it gets a little hairy because, you know, we're like in Montana, you'd be going over the Cook City Highway, or you'd be up in Glacier Park going over the Going to the Sun Highway, two of the most incredible, you know, highways. Well, imagine a train, you know, and you're going up over the Continental Divide, okay, and at the bottom, down to lowlands, the conductor comes and says, well, you know, up here, boy, it's really going to be scenic. Air's going to get a little thin. You know, if we ever went off the tracks up here, we're all dead. Every one of us, the whole thing's gone. Now, you can get off down here in the lowlands if you want. In fact, you can jump right out. We're not going very fast right now. The ground's level because this is flat riding after all. We're in the flat riding level. So go ahead and just jump out. You'll roll a few times and get up, dust yourself off, and probably be able to walk back to where you came from. But if you're going up into the mountain peaks, whole different deal. Because if you go off the tracks up there, down you go.
Yes, yes. And this is an analogy for the Christian life itself that you're just describing as well. Let me see what we've got here. Katie's here. Katie Androsky's here. Melinda Inman. Kathy Green. Kathy Jones. Katie Rouse. Everybody has a K in their name except Melinda, but we're glad you're here, Melinda. Okay, where are we in our trip?
Well, let's get to some really practical stuff. Number one, a three-stranded cord we know is not easily broken. And good plots will generally or often involve three storylines coming together.
Three. Okay.
All right. And the best pattern for this is Edgar Rice Burroughs in the Tarzan novels. Now, you have to understand when Mark Twain and Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote, it was not like today. Those stories were being serialized in newspapers. All right. So you might get just a weekly paper, and it might have 1,000, 1,500 words of this serialized novel in it. And that's how we really developed this cliffhanger approach, because people couldn't wait until the next week. But that's what novels were largely back then. They were serialized. Burroughs became rich and famous out of newspaper serializations of the Tarzan series. And he was a master at taking three different storylines, weaving them together, and bringing them to a knot at the end. And you have to have that knot for the reader to grab at the end. All right? I mentioned this in first session or second. You always have to have a strong ending. To each chapter, you need a strong ending, but certainly to the end of a book. Now, it can't be too strong, it can't, be shocking type of stuff for effect. Don't just go for effect, all right? Go for that wham, to where you close the door on the person, to where they're going to live in that story for a week.
Yes.
They can't get out of that story for a week. That's what a reader wants.
Me too.
They just, the end, okay. No, they want to stay there for about a week.
Yes.
Living with those characters. And if you don't have that as a goal, you're not going to achieve it. If you've got that linear mindset, I'm point A, and here's point B, and I'm going to get over there, and then I'll be done, and then I'll sit back and listen to everybody tell me how wonderful I am. The heartbreaking part of that is if people that know writing yet read your book, they're going to tell you how not so wonderful you are. And you're not ready for that. You're not ready for that. So you need that three-strand cord. And you also have to have those mountainous trips. You have to have those tunnels. You have to have those bends. You need the railroads often followed rivers. You'll notice that they're kind of built on the sides, the banks of rivers. So you have to have that whole life of water and the type of wildlife you're going to see. You have to include nature. There's not enough nature in anybody's books. I mean, I hate to crush some of you little poodle cuddlers, but your poodle is not the epitome of nature. That's how far we are removed from nature. All right, that we think that our lap dogs, are all we know. Now, I understand the city people. I mean, this is going to happen because you're nature deprived. But if you're taking your reader somewhere, take them where there's landscape, take them where there's nature, take them and be honest about it. If you don't know anything about wolves, don't write about wolves.
Yes.
All right? Because I live in an area, in a state that's severely impacted by other people's romantic idealism about wolves. So don't write about things you don't know about, because you might perpetuate a myth that has staggering consequences, on people that deal with reality and live in reality. But include nature and have your people formed out of nature, and you don't see enough of that in writing. People don't look like the land they come from. Again, I don't know if Ray Hughes first brought this to my attention or if he just confirmed it for me, because I think I did sense it a long time ago. You'll notice in the warmer climates, the Mediterranean type climates, the more semi-tropical environments, there's a lot of vowels. All right, and I may have mentioned this in an earlier session, but people have flowing names and flowing language and words, all right? And the colder regions, the harsher regions, you have more consonants. And it's very simple. I mean, it gets down to environment because the Germans are going, you know, they're cold, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm reading mostly Scandinavian fiction. I mean, that's all I've read. 2 American novels in the last 10 months and probably 30 to 40 Scandinavian novels written in English. And the weather plays a huge part in every one of those books. Those people live where they live, and they're not just writing out of their head.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now you get into, you know, again, you get into the more Mediterranean ones, and you got more of a flowing thing. You know, it's softer, it's warmer. You got a lot of words that end with an A, end with an O, you know, and it's much more, there's more of a music to it. So you want to name your characters and have some of that reflect that. All right, as in the more Nordic people you have and the Nordic settings, you get up into from eastern, not so much right here in Miles City, but east of us and north of us, all the way across North Dakota and into Minnesota and the tips of Wisconsin, that is primarily Scandinavian country. It was settled by Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, a few Finns, all right? And they share certain common traits. And you have to learn what those traits are and kind of how they talk. I am not good with languages in the sense of being able to write accents. I don't try to write a Southern novel because I couldn't do it. You know, I'm not good at writing accents, so I don't try. I write legitimate, you know, cowboy novels because, you know, I know cowboys speak, you know, so, you know, that comes natural. But now, practical tips. One word to try and avoid is the word beautiful, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So if you're going to use the word beautiful, it has to come from the protagonist or from the narrator in a sense that you know it's personal to that voice. Okay. But you can't just use this term, oh, it was a beautiful sunset. Oh, it was a beautiful this, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if you generalize too much, if you just use that word. And I get really weary of novels where every woman is beautiful. This happened with another New York Times bestseller just recently that I read. He had 3 female characters. They were all beautiful. Well, you know, first, what's his idea of beauty? And second of all, how in the world did that happen? You know, I mean, you know, he's batting 1,000 here. Well, he's doing it for an effect. And that he was disrespecting the reader just a little bit. He's becoming a comic book, all right, where, you know, the men are all built, you know, and they have these wide shoulders and narrow waists and rippling muscles, you know, and you got all of these curvaceous, vivacious, beautiful women. And you know, so beauty is something that you have to deal with like with art. You got to find your own sense of it and don't impose a general term on everybody. Now, more practical than that, physical exercise. Not enough real writers are actually physical, and you're missing something. And for one thing,
you mean the writers should have physical? Is that what you're?
Yeah, you should be. The book should be too, but your character should be. But if you read the biographies of writers, and again, I've read scores of them. A lot of these people, because the muse, the inspiration, that flow of being who you are, who God made you to be, energizes you to such a point that at a certain point you may have to quit writing and go briskly walk for 5 miles.
Yeah.
You feel so energized. If you keep writing, you'll take a bunny trail and you'll get so far down it you may not come back.
Okay.
There was a famous science fiction writer, I don't know if he's still around, or, you know, in the marketplace, Piers Anthony. And he was big. He got really big. I was a pen pal of his when he was just starting out. And we wrote back and forth, and he was a very helpful, very friendly man. And he told me one time his workout regime in his backyard. And I mean, it was incredible. All right. he was intensely physical. He's telling me how many chin-ups he did, and you just get so, revved up when you really get in the flow that your writing can't take it all, and you got to get out. But there's another reason for that, even if you're not revved up. And this I learned in the martial arts, all right? And that is that deep breathing is so important. Now, if you want to just stop and breathe deeply, that's fine. I'm not that type, all right? I mean, if it doesn't involve risk of death, I'm not interested. So most of us that are really active and type A type personalities, we want to get out there and do something strenuous, because deep breathing oxygenizes, I'm not speaking right now, puts oxygen into your blood, okay? That goes to your nerves and calms the nerves, all right? So deep breathing is really, strenuous exercise is really good. It clarifies the mind. Good writing is clear thinking. You're not going to be thinking clearly unless you get a little oxygen up here and become a little more of an airhead than what you are. You need the right air up in your head to clear out a lot of this. Okay, so it does that, and it centers you. So deep breathing through strenuous exercises, and it gives you self-respect. You can't tell me that anybody that doesn't go for a long walk doesn't feel better about themselves having done it. Because it's your flesh that's telling you to sit home and have another chocolate bar.
True.
Right?
It's true.
Okay? And you can't say, oh yeah, I'm going to eat another chocolate bar because it's really going to inspire me to write. Yeah, your next book is set in Hersey, Pennsylvania. Good. Right. So that's where the strenuous exercises come in, but so can the stroll, the saunter. All right. And again, speaking of Ray Hughes, he mentioned a John Muir quote on Facebook. He posted it the other day, how that actually has a term. That saunter comes from a religious term of making a pilgrimage to honor a saint. All right. So that's what a saunter is. And Ray's a type B personality. I mean, he's going to saunter anyway. I mean, he'll tell us he's going to go visit a saint, but he's just going to saunter and stroll, and he's that type of poetic nature. He refers to me as one of those guys. An idea of a good trip is you got to climb it or kill it. All right. Oh, see, yes. I got to climb the top of that mountain or kill something in the process. Type of thing. I once hiked 12,100 feet to get to the top of a mountain named Mount Abundance, and I thought, there is no way that I'm here at the bottom of this mountain and cannot climb to the top to say that I've scaled the Mount of Abundance. And if snow was up to my, past my ankles, and nobody around, if I'd fallen, grizzly tracks, but I was going to climb Mount Abundance because you got to. I mean, come on. I mean, we're hobbits on a journey, aren't we? And we got to climb Mount Abundance. So you can stroll. Now, when I stroll, like I posted on Facebook the other day, my best strolling is when I take my camera. And I really believe that a writer benefits by being a photographer. Mm-hmm. And you need to have a digital single lens reflex so you can change lenses. I'm not talking about your iPhone. All right. You need to have good enough equipment that you can change lenses, because it gives you microscope and macroscope, point of view. Flat writing will give you just one point of view all the time.
True.
All right. If you take a micro lens with you and you're photographing the ant on the end of a leaf, you see the small beauty. You stop and see something powerful, the universe wrapped up into something tiny right there. All right. And then if you step over a hill and here's this incredible vista with a sunset, and and you take out a good wide angle lens and you shoot that. See, it adds all this point of view. Mm-hmm. Flatness always has one point of view, because the writer is saying, I'm the smartest person on the earth, and how I view things is what is important, because I'm more important than my product. I'm more important than what I'm creating. And you have to, again, die to that, let your gift be bigger than you, and get all these different points of view. See beauty, see substance, see messages where you normally didn't. Now, here's a real test for you. All right. Most writers are highly creative. They have disproved this left brain, right brain hemisphere thing, but I still refer to it. Caroline Leaf is probably the person to best read in the science of the mind of a brain from a Christian perspective. But I know this for a fact, being a very creative, spacey person, and only two people in the universe are more spaced out than me, and that's Wally Badgett and Ray Hughes. And that's why I refer to them a lot, because it elevates me, all right? I'm just a little more sane than those two guys, and so I like to always bring them into the conversation. But really, really creative people are daydreamers, all right? They're lost in this other world, and you have to do something that gets that analytical part of your brain engaged. You'll be a better writer. You can't just have a control thing. Now, I have a friend who is an award-winning novelist, and his first novel won a national award, and he had one whole wall of his office in an outline, which brings up the question, should I outline or not outline? All right. A lot of people will ask that question. I don't. I keep a general outline in my head, and I keep notes. I do not outline a novel. Never have, never will. Now, he had a whole wall, timeline at the top, and then every chapter down with all kinds of minutia, probably clippings, you name it, photographs, blah, blah, blah. His whole novel was there. He was approaching it from an analytical, mindset, but he won a literary award. Okay, so, I mean, he accomplished what he was doing. Now, I am the opposite. And again, my friends Wally and Ray, we'd all be in this boat, and a lot of serious creative people, is we couldn't fix a screen door, I mean, it'd take us a month, just to notice that it's hanging on one hinge. It'd take us 2 more months trying to find somebody to fix it for us. And finally 6 months later, when the blizzard is blowing through, then we say, oh, this wouldn't be so hard, all right? Because we're living in this other universe. Yeah. So we have to do something, because I want this creative flow here. But I'm in a train, and I have to have a certain sense of where that train's going. If Jesse James has cut down a bunch of telephone, poles, telegraph poles up there, and they're on fire, because I am the conductor, I am the tour guide, I am the protagonist, all right? I'm all of these things as the author, okay? So I have to kind of have some idea where this train is going. Yes. So you have to be creative here and enjoying it, and then you have to have that analytical part up here that says, I know where I'm going. I don't know exactly where I'm going. I don't need that big outline up on the wall. That's not me. If it's you, that's fine. But that's not me. But I can't just be down here living in the moment, and then your train goes off a cliff. Yeah. All right. So what do? One thing that I did, and I started late in life, was I reload ammunition. And that's fairly technical, and it's fairly critical. All right. And there's not a lot of room for error. Yeah. And there's a lot of numbers involved. And you have to weigh things, and I mean, there's just a whole lot to involve. And I shoot it for testing, what we call testing loads. And it was very intimidating for me to start, because I knew I was kind of a space case, and I thought, I am going to blow myself up so fast. I'm going to be so dead so quick. I hope the whole house doesn't, go up with me. And I gained a lot of confidence, but because it's not an area of strength for me, if I take 6 months or a year off, I almost have to relearn everything again, because it's not who I am. It's what I make myself do. And while I'm reloading, and I've reloaded for a number of different calibers and thousands of rounds, all right? I mean, I've become not skilled, but I've become adept. I'm somewhat competent at it. But I can't retain it enough to constantly do it, to where I can just step back into it. But it trains my mind in a way that if I was just reading novels all the time, that wouldn't work. The other thing I do is I listen to Bible teaching tapes while I'm reloading. And I learn to multitask in that sense. I'm dealing with specifics, so I have to constantly check my notes. if it calls for 45.4 grains of a particular powder, I don't want to make it, 54 grains. All right. So you have to be humble enough to stop and check. And at the same time, I'm listening to some of the greatest teachers. I've been listening to my friend Ray Hughes. Ray, send a check, please, for all of these paid advertisements. But he is the most interesting person I know. So I've been listening to him and to other, teachings of people I like that inspire me, inform me. The other thing I do, my father could do this even though he only had a 5th grade education. When being a rancher, my taxes are fairly involved. There's probably 3 or 4 different checking accounts and, a lot of numbers. And I don't do anything on the computer. I don't use Quicken or anything to do my taxes. I take everything to the accountant, but I have a columnar pad, and I'll do every month the checks, and I'll do all the math in my head. I don't use a calculator.
Oh.
I do all of those. Now, we're talking, at least 3 checkbooks, and one of them is used a lot. So you're talking about many, many, many columns, and not just for the 1 month, but of course all the various categories over on that other page, all the various types of expenses. And I'll total them all by hand, and then when it goes to add them, I add all of them in my head, and I'll use a pencil to carry the 4 and all that. All right, but I don't use any sort of a calculator, adding machine. My wife bought me one. I spaced out. But if I did it all in my head, I can stay focused and I can do it. Well, I can't tell you how valuable that is when you're writing, because you're creating all these characters and scenarios that you're keeping track of in your head, just like you're counting numbers, all right? Or just like I'm reloading and still listening. You've got to have that ability to be creative down here in this cloud of just energy and creativity and some fun, some turmoil, some strife, and up here just have this analytical part going and working. And it's not taught. I have not, and I've taught very few writer seminars, but I've been to a few, and I've listened to others online and stuff, and you don't hear this taught. And I think it's very valuable. You have to develop both sides of your brain, so to speak.
That makes complete sense, and I have never heard that before.
All right, now here is how, if you want to get blown away by how I have written my novels, and maybe you won't be blown away. Most people are, because they don't think it's this hard. All right. My process of writing a novel is to write chapter 1. The next day, if I'm blessed enough to have a day to write again, I start with chapter 1. And I proofread and edit through it and write chapter 2.
Oh.
The next day, I start with chapter 1. I proofread and read chapters 1 and 2.
Uh-huh.
All right, and write chapter 3. The next day, I start on chapter 1.
Yep.
All right. Now, I did that with 2 of those books you're holding, The Limits of Mercy and Leaving the Land. And I mean, when you're at chapter 40 and you're starting at chapter 1 and you're reading and editing and proofreading and then adding a chapter, but because of being a rancher and having all these other distractions and being in basically full-time ministry then too, to keep continual flow, the constant narrative voice, I had to get back in, jump off the bank into the river and start swimming to the other side every day. I couldn't just jump out there and think I was going to land where I'd left off. Now, if you have the luxury of being a full-time writer, you can probably do that. But most of us don't have that luxury.
Sure.
And as one woman who just won a major award, and she was a janitor at the school that gave the award, and she said that you should have a day job that's not stressful. And I've only had one of those when I was a young writer, and I can tell you it is very helpful to have a boring day job. One that doesn't stress you out and allows you to just live in your imagination and live in the book. And I was a truck driver back then, and I drove safely, but you could just space out. And I thought, man, this is the ideal job for a writer.
Mm-hmm.
But ranching, ministry, these other things aren't that way. And so you're going to be stressed out, you're going to be tired, and you have to use some of that stress in the book. And you have to have a catharsis to some extent. You have to have a few stressed out characters, all right? You have to have a few tired ones. All of this is going to come out. But it's helpful if you don't, but most of us don't have that luxury. So to keep narrative constancy, to keep constant in your narrative voice, I have to go back and read and read and reread what I've already done. Because if I'm reading a book, sometimes I can tell where a writer has lost his or her voice. Mm-hmm. You can tell they set the book down and they came back and picked it up, and you can just get, there's a little hiccup in there.
Yeah.
And I want that flow to where there aren't any hiccups. Now, my last thing on my notes here, by way of looking at it, because I've mentioned John Gardner and I mentioned Annie Dillard, but I've mentioned Ray Hughes a lot, and though he's a musician and a musicologist and historian and a minister, he's also just an expert on the creative process. All right, he's a poet, he's a lyricist, he's these things. But he's a humorist, and I would really recommend to anybody this set called Designed to Worship, and it's no longer available as a CD. It's available as an MP3, and you can either Google Ray Hughes or Salem Ministries, or go to Bethel Church, because they also sell his resources, his books and tapes. But this will blow you away. Now, it is mostly about music and worship and sound, but it's all part of that creative process of being more than we think we can be by being what God knows we can be. All right? Getting out of ourselves in such a way. See, when we get out of ourselves, we're always bigger than ourselves.
Yes. That's good. That's good. Okay. Katie Rouse says, I'm currently reading The Limits of Mercy. It's the best book yet of the Ezra series, but I haven't read Looking for Lynn yet, so she's not sure. Melinda Inman says, that's how she writes also. Otherwise, you can't keep everything in context and maintain the same voice. She also says, the admonishment to walking, sauntering, exercise is so helpful. Many ideas come to us. I just lost her. The challenge of having, and Melinda has a chronic illness and has had for 4 or 5 years. And before that, she was like you. She was very extremely athletic, always outside. It's been a very big change in her spiritually and mentally and in her writing. The challenge of having a chronic illness is changing all of my writing processes. And she's written for years, and after she was a writer and after she was published, then the chronic illness hit her and has been in place all this time. We don't know.
Well, I haven't mentioned it. I was divinely healed, supernaturally healed of a terminal disease, years ago. But I have a chronic illness. And it's taken years from my life. And I very seldom mention it because what good does it do, But one reason I don't travel and I don't socialize, as much as I should, is my immune system is just now getting to where I can be in crowds. But for years, I could not be in a crowd because if anybody had a cold, I wouldn't catch just a cold. I'd be knocked down for 3 or 4 months. And I mean knocked down. I have Epstein-Barr is what I have. And it's a virus, so there's not much you can do about it except know what your weaknesses are and then rebuild your immune system. And there's a lot more people with autoimmune diseases than you realize, which again opens up all kinds of ideas for books, because not everybody's healthy and not everybody's on deathbed, and we use those two extremes. And one thing to mention in that too, if you want a role model, a secular writer, Laura Hillenbrand, author of Seabiscuit and Unbroken. All right, 2 of the greatest books of the last 100 years, both made into very good movies. She not only has, a very serious chronic disease, but she's agoraphobic too.
Oh,
All right, and yet look what she accomplishes. I mean, she's up there in the Pulitzer category, with great, great books. And so, we all just, we carry whatever burden, we seem to have at the time, and don't let that stop any of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that Melinda is a great example of that. Moving forward with less than she had anticipated having, and still being very productive and very effective for Christ. She's a good example. Mm-hmm. Are we finished with our train ride?
Yeah, I think I don't think we went off the rails too far. I heard too much screaming from my end.
Melinda says, I appreciated your mental challenges because it's really necessary due to her autoimmune disease. I completely understand. She can't speak publicly anymore. She can't shake hands. All those things that make up that other people aren't aware of that affect us. And we can't live a life of apologies and explanations. And it's the same with our characters, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, our characters need to have some flaws without being too flawed. As Thoreau said, we lead lives of quiet desperation. And that's what all of our characters do. And how your character is defined is how you deal with that desperation. All right? I mean,
Will you say that again?
Well, all of us lead lives, as Thoreau said, of quiet desperation. How we deal with that quiet desperation will define our character. First, our own character, but it can define the characters in our books. If we're pitiful, we'll be pitiful. All right. If we're angry, we'll be angry about it. If we think there should be justice in the world and there isn't, then we're a candidate for narcissism. And you can write a narcissistic character. And again, if you're writing just for anything other than self-fulfillment in the true sense of that word, you may be motivated by the wrong motivations. If you're angry, that anger is going to come out. If you're pitiful, you're going to, and I've mentioned this before, but there's too many women writing out of hurt feelings. There's just offense. They've been offended, and by golly, now they're just going to take on the world and teach the world, don't offend me. And the thing is, that's a good catharsis, but don't publish it because we don't need to read it.
Yes. I'd agree with that. I stay away from people. It doesn't take long. You can pick up on that, even if you're just skimming through the book.
Yeah.
It's not intriguing at all. It doesn't satisfy me as a reader. I'm not interested in the story. On and on and on and on it goes. That's just not a good idea.
No.
Okay. Did you have something else?
Well, let me see. I don't think so. I think again, I say just do anything in the world to avoid flat writing. Even if you have to spend a couple of months studying and meditating on what flat writing is so that you will avoid doing it.
Can we look that up and find out what flat writing is? Is it so well known? Or is that a John-ism?
No, it's pretty well known. I think I bet in today's world you can probably go on YouTube and get whole tutorials, on how to round out your characters and have more active verbs and all the things that bring fullness and life, into your writing. Or you could do like me and buy some 100 books on the craft of writing, and you'll glean a few out of every one.
Let's see. What else have we got here right before we get... Hey, Zena, how are you? It's good to see you. Let's see if I've gotten everything. Everybody's agreeing with you, telling you how wise you are. That's always good. Okay. All right. So, viewers, we're already talking, John and I, about coming back another time. We still have to be worked into his schedule, which is very, very hectic, very busy. And it's just a gracious gift to us every time he can come. And because he can come so rarely, we make it a long session because we don't want to miss anything, right? Thank you very much, Mr. John Elmore, for being with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. Bless you.
This has been Marketers on a Mission, episode number 148. Fiction is like a train ride with writer John L. Moore. And I really appreciated the analogy. It was very fitting, and it helped me understand exactly all of your points, John, and I understood where we would be heading. Tomorrow, wellness coach Susan Neal will join me with her latest release, 7 Steps to Get Off Sugar and Carbohydrates. She'll also tell us how she sold 1,000 books in 3 months. And there was a lot of prep work beside that, so don't get too excited. There's work, always work behind good results. You know, we're here every day, every weekday, 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern. This program is designed with you in mind to help you learn the craft of writing from professional writers, and to then learn how to teach you how to then market that message online, because your audience is online. Thanks very much for being here. John and I say good afternoon. We'll talk to you tomorrow.